Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. It is a cold and dark and dreary morning in the nation's capital, Niall, and the first of many to come, unfortunately, but here we are.
Let's look on the bright. That was a very bleak introduction, Robby.
Yes, it was.
Not normally your terrific Tuesday bigging us all up. But
well, it will be your challenge, Niall, to improve my mood throughout the show. So choose your words carefully, my friend.
Not something that the gloomy Irish are typically genetically very well suited to.
You know, I'm listening. I'm reading a book right now, The Terror, which is a historical fiction about the doomed Terror and Erebus expeditions to find the Northwest Passage in the 1840s. And so the sailors, many of them are British and Irishmen. The main character, Crozier, is an Irishman. And I'm listening to the audiobook.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to an impression of one of your countrymen every morning.
I hope it's vaguely proximate to reality, at least.
It's very good.
We shall see. Coming up on Rising, the Supreme Court has rejected a call to revisit its decision on same-sex marriage.
Plus, the Democrats are calling on Senator Chuck Schumer to step down as leader after 8 senators voted with Republicans to end the government shutdown.
And President Trump has pardoned Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and others who allegedly tried to overturn the 2020 election results. But first, Robby, what is on your radar?
Well, Niall, Barstool founder Dave Portnoy appeared on CBS News over the weekend claiming that anti-Semitism is on the rise. The popular sports and politics commentator is Jewish and said the number of racist insults he receives on a daily basis has dramatically increased. Take a look.
I've seen in my own experience, just being Barstool, the difference between how much hate I get. I mean, occasionally you get, hey, or Jew or whatever. It's every day now. Like, there's a definitive shift in what's going on. So, yes, now I for me, being a Jewish person, like, you gotta step up. You're kind of someone people look up to in the Jewish community. You have to be like, all right, this is not normal, ha-ha, with the guys. People are coming in with real hate.
His comments follow a viral instance of anti-Semitism in which someone screamed F the Jews at Portnoy on the street in broad daylight. Let's watch.
Wait, Why come in the camera, buddy? Why? Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come on. Come on.
I shouldn't be allowed to make those jokes, right? I should be putting handcuffs. That's what you said.
No, handcuffs. No, you can
That's
joke.
what you said.
To be clear, it's totally fine to hate Dave Portnoy, but F the Jews? Now, I'm highlighting that incident because it is notable, in my view. This was not an internet comment from some random faceless troll. We all receive unpleasant and occasionally vile feedback on social media from accounts that disparage people for all sorts of reasons, race, gender, sexuality, and so on. But usually the would-be insult hurlers are a bit more restrained in person, where they can be identified, named, and shamed and suffer adverse impacts, loss of job, etc. In fact, the person who screamed that was arrested. Now, in other words, I think we need to face a really uncomfortable fact. Anti-Semites increasingly feel empowered to express anti-Jewish animus in public. Their intolerance has been branded as edgy, cool, and contrarian, and ultimately acceptable, and that's a very, very bad thing. Now look, I realize it can be a bit grating to listen to rich and famous and powerful people like Dave Portnoy complain about how they're being treated. I, for one, think if you make a living as a commentator, you just have to deal with the fact that people are going to utter obscenities at you. It comes with the territory. Pundits, like myself, who obsess over how frequently they've been threatened or have often lost their sense of proportion of how entitled they seem. Furthermore, pundits who complain about, for instance, racist or misogynistic feedback are often merely objecting to the fact that their commentary has grown stale. It is no longer resonating with their audiences. So these complaints can also serve as an invitation for censorship, i.e., my critics are viciously attacking me, and therefore social media CEOs and/or Congress must silence them. And look, we all know how that turns out, so let's set all that aside. For all those reasons, I'm personally highly resistant to arguments that online hate represents anything particularly real or that a certain kind of animus or prejudice is increasing. On just the anti-Semitism front, we've been treated year after year to claims by Jewish advocacy groups like the Anti-Defamation League that the picture's always getting a little bit worse. These groups can be like the boy who cried wolf. The lesson of that story, though, is not that all wolf warnings are false. Indeed, there eventually is a wolf and it kills all the sheep. Similarly, I am deeply troubled by how much casual anti-Semitism I am encountering on both the right and left these days. And when I say anti-Semitism, I mean actual anti-Semitism. not criticism of Israel, not disagreement with U.S. support for the war in Gaza, not fervent objection to the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's true that people who criticize Israel, oppose war, and dislike Netanyahu have been smeared as anti-Semites by bad faith defenders of the status quo, of unlimited American aid to and support of Israel, no matter its policies. Unfortunately, we are well beyond that now. It's not just criticism of Israel, it's criticism of Jews. In fact, Jews are being held responsible for the policies of Israel, whether or not they support them. Nick Fuentes, a would-be thought leader of the young right, holds the Jewish people in contempt because he disagrees with Israel. He doesn't just hate Israel, he hates the Jews. He's gaining ground, which means that conservatives can no longer pretend that anti-Semitism is confined to the left. It is absolutely, definitively present on both ends of the political spectrum. Here was Senator Ted Cruz calling out anti-Semitism on his side recently. Take a look.
In the last 6 months, I have seen more anti-Semitism on the right than at any time in my lifetime. It is rising on the right, and it is dangerous. And if we look away, if we refuse to denounce it, if we are scared of it, it could destroy the Republican Party just like it has destroyed the Democrat Party. I think we have an obligation to stand up, to speak out. Many elected Republicans are terrified to say anything. And I think this is a moment where everyone decides, where do you stand? Are you willing to stand up and speak the truth? And it is going to matter in the coming years whether our party and even more fundamentally our country survives.
I agree with him. I've seen it too. Now, to be absolutely clear, no one is being called on to defend Israel or to defend Netanyahu or to defend American tax dollars being sent overseas. I definitively oppose that. Conservatives are being called, however, to reject prejudice against a race of people, the Jews. This is because collective punishment and race-based identitarianism are anathema to conservatism. Modern conservatism is an individualist philosophy that has its roots in classical liberalism, a philosophy that emphasizes equality of just that, individuals. Not race-based equality or group-based equality, but liberty based in the dignity of every individual. My intellectual hero, Ayn Rand, once said that the smallest minority on earth is the individual. Those who deny individual rights cannot claim to be defenders of minorities. Now, she was saying this to the left as an explanation of why progressive defenders of minorities should prefer individual rights rather than group identity-based understanding of rights. But that saying should apply to these new anti-Semites as well, these anti-Semites on the right. We must defend the equal rights of all people, Jews, blacks, women, and so on, all the groups of people that Fuentes hates, by the way, because they're all individuals, and individuals have rights. Not countries, not governments, not groups of people based on bloodline, but individuals. That is the ideology of the right, and that is why it is incumbent on true conservatives to purge the anti-Semites, the actual anti-Semites, not mere Israel critics, from our midst.
That's pretty good, Robby. I don't really disagree with any of that. I mean, I think you did draw a definite line, as we all have to, between criticism of Israel or criticism of particular Israeli politicians like Netanyahu and prejudice, of which anti-Semitism is obviously one form. And there does seem to be an open or a more open expression of anti-Semitism, particularly in the case of Fuentes. But generally, I mean, it's very rare for me to agree with Ted Cruz, but what he said in that clip, I would have no issue with. I do think that part of this mix is the way, unfortunately, defenders of Israel or defenders of Netanyahu have sought to paint any criticism as anti-Semitic just straight off the bat.
I absolutely agree with that.
And that's a big problem.
I absolutely agree with that. And I've seen that.
Yeah.
And I've called that out. And so I understand if you're coming at this from a totally neutral vantage point, being suspicious of these complaints of rising anti-Semitism because you are used to having just perfectly legitimate opposition to what Israel's doing, an opposition I share, being painted as anti-Semitism. I've seen that. I have borne the brunt of that. People have hurled that at me. So I get it. But this is very different. This goes well beyond that. It is a simple hatred of Jewish people and a blaming of all the Jewish people for what Israel's doing, even if they object to it. I know many Jews who object to the Netanyahu government.
No, absolutely. And there does also seem to have been a unfortunate resurgence of tropes that are plainly anti-Semitic, that essentially the Jews control everything. Right. The Jews are pulling the strings, all of that stuff. That I think is very toxic and very dangerous indeed. And we, whatever our political views or our views of Israel's conduct, you have to push back against that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Enough is enough.
Chuck Schumer is in hot water after 8 senators voted to end the government shutdown, 8 Democratic senators, that is. The growing calls within the party for leadership change coming up. We'll be right back.
I want an opposition party. I think the Democrats caved. I think the Democrats let down the American people. And like you, Whoopi, I have absolutely no faith that the Republican Party will come to the negotiating table in good faith. Shame on the Democrats for even believing that the Republicans will, even vote on it.
The View's Sonny Hostin slamming the 8 senators who voted with Republicans to pass the funding bill and end the government shutdown after more than 40 days.
Notably, none of those 8 Democrats were up for re-election, leading many to think that the sudden changes of heart weren't exactly random, but perhaps coordinated by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's now taking much of the heat. Take a listen to what Sonny said next.
The Democrats went into this after a blue wave out of the American people saying, we do want the opposition. The working people want the Democratic Party to fight for them. And now they just caved and surrendered. I think Chuck Schumer, his days are over. If he cannot keep his caucus together, he needs to go.
And she's not alone. Many Democrats in Congress are also calling for a change in Senate leadership. Congressman Ro Khanna writing on X, Senator Schumer is no longer effective and should be replaced. If you can't lead the fight to stop healthcare premiums from skyrocketing for Americans, what will you fight for? To which Graham Plattner, the popular Democratic Senate candidate from Maine, replied, Chuck Schumer is not built for this moment.
Massachusetts Representative Seth Moulton, who's also running for Senate, took a swing at Schumer on X, writing that the vote was, quote, another example of why we need new leadership. If Chuck Schumer were an effective leader, he would have united his caucus to vote no tonight and hold the line on health care. Meanwhile, party leadership seems to be standing behind Schumer. DNC Chair Ken Martin writing in a statement, quote, as this vote moves to the House, I stand with Democratic leadership as they refuse to rubber stamp the full-scale Republican assault on Americans' health care, and I am proud of the majority of Senate Democrats who opposed this vote. Schumer seems like a bad leader, though, no matter what they say, and gotta go, but is, I don't think, going to go.
I don't think so. I don't think that there are enough votes to oust him, and I'm not sure who the replacement would be. I mean, it's Bernie Sanders isn't going to finally officially become a Democrat and be elected the Senate leader, you know. I think that there are 2 related problems here. There is Schumer himself and the fact that he can often seem ineffective or ill-suited to this moment. I think you and I discussed several months ago when they were having, the protests about Doge, and he was outside some government department, and it was this sort of, we will win chant was just terrible. It was just very cringe-making. But in addition to Schumer himself, I mean, there's a much bigger battle going on here, I think, between a more, not even moderate, but more corporatist kind of leadership and a lot of energy that's on the grassroots, in the grassroots that's very different from that. Not only more left-wing, sometimes is, but just generally more populist, wanting a more confrontational approach with the current administration, wanting people to really punch back harder. And that's not really Schumer's style. Like he'll say, fairly combative words, but he just doesn't have a Graham Plattner or a Bernie vibe to him.
Well, we talked about this yesterday, and I certainly understand the Democratic frustration. We just came off we the Democrats came off a big win, so why cave now? On one hand,
the Democrats is a lovely phrase to hear coming out of your mouth, Robin.
If I'm putting on my Democratic hat. On the other hand, I think the Republicans would have been willing to keep the government shut down for a long time, so maybe they didn't. You don't have the cards, you don't have the hand.
Right.
Although Trump is kind of erratic and is not actually maybe as interested in defending some of the conservative, limited government ideas about healthcare and might have forced Republicans to cave. So who knows? We didn't mention this yesterday, though, the filibuster being in the background. Trump signaling that he wanted to end the government, get rid of the filibuster to end the government shutdown, which spooked a lot of Republicans who don't want to do that. The filibuster is interesting because obviously when you're in the majority, the idea of ending the filibuster sounds very appealing.
We can get into everything we want.
Right,
That's
you
fine.
could pass your agenda very easily.
Right.
But this is very basic concern. Well, what about when this is a frightening new power to give to my enemies when if they ever retake control? And so there's kind of always that. We should be wary of that and thus not do it. Trump wanted to do it, was perfectly willing to do it, is I think less of an institutionalist, less concerned about the long-term health of the Republican Party post-Trump is not, I think, his top priority.
Certainly not.
And so he was willing to kill it. And I think many Democrats, though, would be willing to get rid of it too, because similar, they're thinking, also their idea is that why should it take 60 votes to pass legislation? Right. I fully admit, even though I think the filibuster mostly serves my political interests in that as a libertarian, I am just take a piece of legislation, I don't know what it says, I am more likely to oppose it than not without even knowing what's in it, because that just speaks to my ideology. Right. The filibuster thwarts legislation, so I support it. There are, I'm sure, some rare cases where I would have liked the legislation to go forward and the filibuster gets in its way. That's unfortunate. Those are few and far between. However, I must admit, constitutionally and procedurally, it simply makes no sense to have it. It was not prescribed by our founders that it should take 60 votes rather than 51 to pass a piece of legislation, and it certainly creates a significant amount of dysfunction.
Yeah, look, part of the whole discussion around that is Democrats don't like it in part because the nature of the Senate, 2 senators from each state, effectively gives a slightly disproportionate impact to rural states, which tend to be Republican. So there is a partisan argument there. I tend to oppose the filibuster for exactly the opposite reasons to which you support it, which is that my view basically is that a lot of voters, I think, a lot of Americans right now, sometimes get most disenchanted by the fact that often nothing seems to happen in Congress. Now, because you are generally opposed to government, you're fine with nothing happening. Yeah. My argument is if the electorate gives a mandate to a particular party, especially in a situation of unified government, then that party should have a reasonable chance of carrying out that mandate. And if the voters don't like it, they can vote Party A out and Party B in at the next election. And then Party B would have the chance to put in its manifesto promises in a better way. So that's why I don't agree with the filibuster. I think you should have the right in the majority to go forward more ambitiously.
Yeah, I understand that, and I also am wary of the consequences of the legislature being rendered so ineffective and doing so little legislating, is that more legislating is done by courts, by the president himself, and by, worst of all for me, just bureaucrats who are not elected at all and are not subject to the same level of scrutiny as the courts and the president, and are often making decisions that I think are very bad and that are effective rulemaking that should be done by Congress that isn't done because Congress doesn't have a job anymore.
Right, and it's been done by people who no one voted for.
Right. Coming up, speaking of the Supreme Court, they have refused to revisit the ruling on same-sex marriage. More on that decision next. Well, the Supreme Court has denied a request to revisit its decision on same-sex marriage. That request came from former Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis, who in 2015 defied a court order by refusing to issue same-sex marriage licenses to same-sex couples.
The High Court refused the appeal without comment. Davis was hoping to overturn a lower court ruling that had ordered her to pay $360,000 in damages and attorney fees to a same-sex couple. The lawyer who argued the Obergefell case, Mary Bonato, said in a statement, quote, "Today, millions of Americans can breathe a sigh of relief for their families, current or hoped for, because all families deserve equal rights under the law."
Davis's team, however, appears confident that Obergefell will eventually get overturned. One of her lawyers, Matthew Staver, said that the opinion was, quote, "egregiously wrong from the start. It is not a matter of if, but when the Supreme Court will overturn Obergefell."
Democratic Senator John Fetterman reacted on X, writing, "Marriage equality is the law of the land. Freedom to pick your partner is a fundamental part of the American way of life."
Meanwhile, political commentator Link Lauren wrote this. I've had friends calling for months to say, I need to speak up about this. Do they ever get tired of being outraged over nothing? Yeah, there was, I think the conservative perspective, or the gay conservative perspective, is that liberals were fear-mongering over this, and there was almost no chance the Supreme Court was going to revisit the issue, and they have decided not to revisit the issue, so there was no reason to be all that concerned.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those issues where public opinion really has changed radically, and there's really very little support for overturning same-sex marriage.
Although, frankly, it's come down a little bit in recent years, which
it has
a variety of possible reasons for that. But.
Right, but over the longer term, the difference is wild. I was just looking at the Gallup figures back in the mid-90s. Only 27% of people supported same-sex marriage and 68% opposed. By last year, that was almost exactly reverse, 68% supporting and 29% opposed. I think the reason, to defend the Liberal side from the charge of fear-mongering a little bit, I think a lot of the genuine fear stems from Clarence Thomas at the time that Roe versus Wade was overturned. Thomas, in that decision, gave this opinion where he talked about the idea that the Supreme Court was going to have to correct the error in other cases. I won't get too deep into the jurisprudence of this, but he basically thinks that the same principle applies to that was struck down in Roe versus Wade to several other cases, not only the one that deals with same-sex marriage, but one that deals with just same-sex sex, and like weirdly the provision of contraception as well, contraceptives. So that statement on his part, I think, is part of the Liberal fear, as is the fact that I had, in fact, forgotten about this. 3 of the 9 justices who are still on the court, where they had opposed the Obergefell ruling in the first place. Now, John Roberts was one of the 3. He apparently has said virtually nothing on the issue since then. But that math plus the Clarence Thomas factor, I think, is what disconcerts Liberals.
Well, I'm probably going to blow your mind here, Niall, but I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, I agree with the dissenters, even though I am...
Shocking.
Well, I'm in support of same-sex marriage. I don't think it's in the Constitution that a state is required. I would vote for it. If I lived in a state where it was on the ballot, I would vote for it. I'm in support of it. But just like abortion, I don't think it is required under the Constitution. The states are required to recognize contracts in other states, so the state should be required to... Texas has to recognize a marriage performed in New York, but I would say that if they don't want to recognize gay marriages, then that's their choice. And that's the wrong choice, but I would just...
But sure,
I don't think the Constitution forces them to do it, so I disagree with the majority in that ruling.
But the difference is, in abortion, though, there's the whole issue of whether the Constitution guarantees the right to privacy, which I think is dubious. I think in same-sex marriage, there's a much stronger argument to be made about equal protection, right?
Yeah, it is a stronger argument, but I'm vigorously in favor of legislators, choosing to make that the law of their state, but. I guess I wouldn't have the feds impose it on unwilling states. Now, Kim Davis, who sued, is a different. She's a clerk who needs to, she should not. She's a federal employee. She has to follow the law as prescribed by the court. So I don't support her quixotic crusade on this at all.
To allow herself to make up the laws. Coming up, I'll be discussing how the Trump administration has used the battle over SNAP benefits for political ends and the consequences that can emerge from that. Stick around.
All right, Niall, what's in your notes today?
I'm glad you asked, Robby, because it looks like the government is well on its way to reopening after a long shutdown. But the effects of the shutdown don't instantly disappear, and the lessons we've learned from it shouldn't be forgotten either. It's always worth remembering the advice commonly attributed to Maya Angelou: when someone shows you who they are, believe them. President Trump and his allies have shown us their willingness to use some of the poorest Americans as political tools, regardless of the suffering that causes. I'm talking, of course, about the battle over SNAP benefits. Around 42 million Americans use those benefits, commonly known as food stamps. Many millions of Trump voters are among them. One of the highest per capita rates of SNAP usage is in Deep Red, Oklahoma, where roughly 1 person in every 6 is on the program. There's no shame in that, of course, but there's plenty of shame in the way SNAP beneficiaries have been treated by the administration. The president and his friends have done everything they can to wheedle their way out of providing desperately needed benefits. They've done so to try to ramp up suffering as a political tactic. And that's morally wrong, regardless of whether or not it turns out to be politically effective. Trump's push is still going on, even though the shutdown seems about to end. Just yesterday, lawyers for the administration went before the Supreme Court. They want the justices to intervene, to block decisions from lower courts requiring the payment of full SNAP benefits. Even with the shutdown in full effect, there's money to fund the programme for the moment, but the administration won't use it. Sometimes their reasoning has been particularly absurd. Here's Kevin Hassett, the director of Trump's National Economic Council, on CNN last week, and Jon Stewart's reaction on The Daily Show.
We have a little rainy day fund for food stamps in case there's a disaster, which is about half as much as you need for a month of food. And they're saying, oh, just release that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we are. It's a rainy day fund. This qualifies.
But also, as you've seen with the hurricane in Jamaica, that, you know, if our rainy day fund is gone, then what happens if we have a rainy day?
It doesn't have to literally be a rainy day to be a rainy day fund.
Funny, though, of course, the underlying story is so serious. The Supreme Court could rule as early as today, but the lower courts have blasted Trump for his conduct so far. A US District Court judge in Rhode Island last week hit back at the administration for ignoring his prior order to quickly restart SNAP payments. The administration had done so for, quote, political reasons, Judge John McConnell Jr. said. There is, as always, a bigger picture here. Trump can say whatever he likes about being the champion of forgotten Americans, but when the crunch comes, he'll take the side of rich Americans and disparage or hurt the poor as fast as any country club Republican ever would. Yesterday, the president spoke to Laura Ingraham of Fox News. Here's some of their exchange.
Take a look at some of the welfare things that we're talking about. They've doubled, tripled, and quadrupled since I left office.
SNAP benefits have
well, SNAP has gone from
high.
like $7 billion to many times $7 billion.
This is nonsense. The last time SNAP benefits cost the government $7 billion or less was decades before Donald Trump entered politics. If you're curious, it was actually in 1979. And SNAP's number of beneficiaries has not doubled, nor tripled, nor quadrupled since Trump's time in office. In his last full year in office, it was just short of 40 million. And no, that was not some pandemic-related spike. In 2018, the middle of Trump's first term, unaffected by the pandemic, the number of people receiving SNAP benefits was 40.7 million. Last year, it was 41.7 million. But it suits Trump to blame the poor. Here's some more of his exchange with Ingraham.
Can we reform SNAP and these benefits so they're used for the people who really need them?
It's meant for people. And you know what it does is it really puts the country at jeopardy. People that need it have to get it. I'm all for it. But people that are able-bodied can do a job. They leave their job because they figure they can pick this up. It's easier. That's not the purpose of.
Nonsense once again. SNAP does not put the country in jeopardy. Its total cost to the government is around $100 billion a year. The massive tax and spending bill Trump passed earlier this year will add more than 3 times that amount to the nation's deficit. And the bigger, more toxic lie in that clip there is that SNAP is for the lazy or the job shy. Many, many millions of SNAP beneficiaries are working. Trump's own government data notes that more than half the SNAP households with children have an adult who's working. Now, are there hard questions to be asked about SNAP? Of course there are. Why do more than 40 million people in the richest nation in the history of the world not have enough money to feed themselves? Why do we let corporations get away with not paying a living wage? Why does Mr. Trump's version of fiscal conservatism require punishing the poor but not stop giving him giving tax breaks to the rich? Those are questions Laura Ingraham didn't ask yesterday, but we Certainly should. You're a big fan of SNAP benefits, Robby, I imagine.
I am not. Look, while I don't think that welfare is should be a core function of the federal government, certainly there are many Americans who do not want to suddenly yank funds away from the truly needy poor, and I don't either. There's a lot the government spends money on that I don't agree with. This is not where I would first concentrate my scalpel of government spending. $100 billion is not nothing, and we can't. I sometimes start to roll my eyes when it's like, well, but this is only this much and this is only this much. We'll never cut anything. There's no one chunk that we can easily do away with, or else it would be already done. But I would rather concentrate on reform other aspects of the entitlement system and defense spending, which are the bulk of the budget. And I do think that you mentioned like paying living wage and things of that nature. I'm actually more against those policies than I am against
very anti-paying the living wage.
Well, I'm against having the government try to restructure the economy in terms of rules for what firms pay, what they can buy, how they operate. That reduces economic productivity. I would rather unleash the market to create as much prosperity as possible for firms, for individuals, and then what we do in the form of welfare is redistribute some of those profits to needy people. I think that is a better system than one where the government tries to say this job should pay this much money and this job should pay this much money, which has an effect of basically harming the labor market overall. I would rather unleash it, let it make money, and then if the result is too unequal, we redistribute some of it.
I know that is a belief you hold. I feel that this is one of our biggest philosophical differences every time it comes up, because to me that theory that you've just outlined, or that plan that you've just outlined.
It's a plan, by the way, that Americans hate.
Yeah.
No one agrees with me. They're like, no, don't give me any welfare. I just want just want it to be a fair job. Like, no, that holds us back. We'll give you welfare. Stop messing with things.
But the welfare, in a sense, is actually like corporate welfare in a legitimate sense, because the problem is created by the corporations not paying their workers sufficient for those workers to properly afford food. So the government is really taking taxpayer money and subventing employers who aren't paying a high enough wage.
Well, then, the effective minimum wage is zero. They'll never pay you more than your labor is worth. Labor is not worth this is getting to like Marxist versus Austrian thinking of labor, but there's its value is only what someone else is willing to pay for it, the value of anyone's labor. And if the government says, here is what we require you to pay, and the firm says that person's labor is not worth that, they will not employ that person, and they'll just have someone else do that work instead. I think this is most obviously demonstrated for entry level and in fact student internship type people. In fact, in our own field in journalism, this is why I oppose a lot of these exact efforts to say, no, they have to pay you this much to begin with. My labor when I was starting off I was paid $25,000 a year at my first job in journalism, which is not enough to survive on in DC at all, but I wasn't worth more. If it was, you have to pay this person $40, I just wouldn't have gotten the job ever.
But even in that instance, not to go all batya on you, but this is one of the reasons why journalism is increasingly dominated by people from fairly affluent backgrounds, because if you are someone from a background where you have to earn as soon as you can a wage upon which you can live, and there's no cushion to fall back on, then it gets more and more difficult if you're on very low wages. And I just don't, more broadly outside of the journalism example, I just don't buy this idea that, the market will take care of it all. Corporations which have enormous power will keep wages as suppressed as they possibly can because it's in their economic interests to do so. And therefore there is a legitimate role for government to counteract that power.
Yeah, that's our disagreement. I would say, but labor is a resource like any other.
Yeah.
And so while it sounds bad that, they keep wages low, well, then that results in lower prices in terms of their service, where if you raise the cost of the labor cost, it's like raising any other cost of raw materials, then the good costs more. So I would subsidize the laborers forms of welfare rather than tell the company what they
I feel this is our deepest schism, but there we go.
We'll discuss it further at a later date. Next up, Trump has pardoned more than 70 people over the weekend, including his former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. That's next on Rising. Stay with us.
A little more than 9 months after pardoning nearly 1,600 people connected to the January the 6th Capitol riot, President Trump issuing another round of pardons related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This time for his legal team, close advisors, and some so-called alternate electors.
Among those pardoned were his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, as well as Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, both of whom led Trump's election challenges in court. All told, more than 70 people were named in the pardon document posted to social media by DOJ Attorney Ed Martin over the weekend. The White House later confirmed that the pardons were real, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying in a statement Monday, quote, "These great Americans were persecuted and put through hell by the Biden administration for challenging an election, which is the cornerstone of democracy."
Notably, Trump left his own name off the pardon list, avoiding the issue of whether he can indeed pardon himself. But that didn't stop a flurry of criticism online for the sweeping pardons. The Bulwark publisher, Sarah Longwell, writing on X, "Anyone who helps me try to steal an election gets a pardon is perhaps the most corrupt thing to happen in American history. That quote-unquote conservatives have simply accepted this as the price of admission is the greatest moral and intellectual humiliation." And Senator Adam Schiff, who has been a target of President Trump during his second term, wrote in his own post, "First, Trump pardoned the violent insurrectionists who beat cops. Now he pardons the key instigators of January the 6th. We need to see this for what it is, an attempt to erase history so it can be repeated."
Schiff isn't alone in thinking that this is laying the groundwork for future election challenges. Liz Oyer, the DOJ's former pardon attorney, who was replaced this year by Ed Martin, told Politico, quote, "Trump is sending a message to his supporters that if you commit a crime in the name of Donald Trump, I've got your back." She continued, saying the pardon was written so broadly it could apply to countless people, and the vague wording means Martin and the DOJ will decide for themselves who receives a pardon certificate. I expect you are very upset about this,
I am.
Niall.
Very aggrieved. I mean, I think that Trump's whole conduct in relation to January the 6th and in his second term, as far as the pardons of people who were convicted of January the 6th crimes and now these pardons, has been pretty disgraceful. I see it as exactly what that person we quoted alluded to, an attempt to rewrite history. I think it was Adam Schiff who said that part. And of course, there is a fear about where it leads in the future. People like Giuliani and Sidney Powell were involved in propagating this myth about election fraud, and certainly in Giuliani's case, doing stuff about it, like making representations to state-level representatives, arguing that they should overturn the election. I mean, it was just a disgraceful episode in American history. I think even for Trump, even for someone who has a life dotted with so many controversies, it's by far the most indefensible thing he's done. And I think that's why he's at such pains to try to rewrite it.
It is a difficult thing to defend, so I won't attempt to make that here. I mean, there are aspects of Trumpism I find more appealing and less appealing. Certainly, his antics related to the election are not, that's not the good stuff. It was a lot that was quite wrong. I think what I would say from if I was speaking to a MAGA perspective, I would say, these people are being pardoned for being Trump's guys, for having his back, but did they really have his back? Because they gave him terrible advice. They helped convince him that there was, all these fraudulent votes, and that they had no evidence for that. They went on TV and made claims that were disproven. Claims that were so false and fraudulent, they got Fox News in trouble when they made those claims on TV. They got those outlets sued for the things they said. So, did they really have Trump's best intentions in mind? Were they really doing, or were they just telling him what he wanted to hear and offering some totally fraudulent rationale that ended up getting Trump in more trouble, that got him indicted in multiple efforts? Rudy Giuliani himself, that was twice because the first impeachment, the Ukraine thing, my reading of that was largely Rudy Giuliani luring him into a made up, a concocted idea that he could offer, that he could do this quid pro quo type thing. Rudy Giuliani is not someone I really ever liked very much. I've kind of had a grudge against him ever since I think the 2008 Republican primaries, where he said that he accused Ron Paul of hating America or of siding with the terrorists for criticizing American foreign policy at the height of war on terror fervor. I think history has borne out that Ron Paul was right about that, and even most conservatives and most MAGA agree with Ron Paul and not Rudy Giuliani. He's a duplicitous figure. Maybe he was a heroic mayor of New York in the immediate 9/11 aftermath, but I think he is, at best, a very mixed figure, and is not someone who is deserving of this course of action, even from a pro-Trump standpoint. What did he do? He got Trump in more trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not a Giuliani fan and never was. And you know, prior to 9/11, his record as mayor of New York was very dubious and involved all sorts of inflammatory things. In relation to the election stuff, I mean, yes, it's fair enough to say they were giving Trump bad advice. They certainly were. As you suggested when Dominion sued Fox, what you saw was the evidence of all these desperate, like Fox people behind the scenes going, are these guys going to produce any evidence? And they never, ever did. It was done, though, as you said, in response to Trump's desire to hear, to be told what he wanted to hear, and to his anger at people who didn't do that. I mean, Bill Barr, the then Attorney General, said that there's no evidence of widespread fraud, and Trump went ballistic. So that, I mean, I think it all comes back to Trump in the end. That's my basic view of it all. In other news, Marjorie Taylor Greene is blasting President Trump for meeting with the President of Syria and a former Al-Qaeda leader at the White House. We'll look at Trump's response right after this.
President Donald Trump took a shot at Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene during a press conference yesterday.
Earlier in the day, Greene had lamented the fact that former Al-Qaeda leader turned Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa was meeting with Trump. She wrote in part, quote, I would really like to see non-stop meetings at the White House on domestic policy, not foreign policy, and foreign countries' leaders. Start by hauling in the health insurance companies' executives, and let's start formulating our Republican plan to save America from Obamacare and ACA tax credits that have skyrocketed the cost of health insurance. CNN's Caitlin Collins asked Trump about this and added that Greene has also spoken out about rising prices. Here is the president's response.
I don't know what happened to Marjorie. She's a nice woman, but I don't know what happened. She's lost her way, I think. But I have to view the presidency as a worldwide situation, not locally. I mean, we could have a world that's on fire where wars come to our shores very easily if you had a bad president. When somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's now catering to the other side, I don't know what, I guess she's, got some kind of an act going, but I'm surprised at her. But when somebody like Marjorie goes over and starts making statements like that, it shows she doesn't know.
Collins said on X that Greene responded to Trump in a statement to CNN saying, quote, I haven't lost my way. I'm 100% America first and only. Well, I've defended and agreed with a lot of what Marjorie Taylor Greene has had to say lately. On this one, I would back Trump. I mean, the administration could do multiple things at once, and it is important for the president to engage with world leaders. And this world leader, al-Sharaa, I know there are actually some people who are not in the Marjorie Greene camp, like Laura Loomer, for instance, who's furious that Trump would meet with this former Al-Qaeda person. I'm for engagement. He's the president of Syria now, and he wants Western engagement. He wants to play nice with the U.S. He wants to get along with us. That's a good thing. That's what we always want in the Middle East when a new regime comes in. We want them to seek to be our friends. I'm for giving him a chance. He seems very sincerely, he's sick of fighting. Let's try to move forward. That's great. I'm not saying it's all going to be perfect and we should remain vigilant, but he is the president now, and he wants Western engagement, and that's a good thing. He got asked about, he's done the media tour, and he got asked about, 9/11. He was like, well, I was like a teenager then. He joined Al-Qaeda after, when his country was invaded, and he's very I think what he said is impressive. It just laser focused on it's terrible, everyone who got killed on both sides, and let's have peace. That's all Trump's interested in. So I'm good with that. That's fine by me.
Yeah, look, it's been a wild journey for Mr. Al-Shura. There's no question about that. But on the other hand, how many people could we point to through history who have made that journey from so-called terrorist to so-called statesman or leader? Like, that is quite a frequently trodden path, for good or for bad. Now,
as Tywin Lannister says in Game of Thrones, when your enemies lay down their swords and submit, you treat them well, or else no one will ever submit.
Well, that seems...
And they'll fight to the death. That was the stupidest thing we ever did with Gaddafi.
Right.
Gaddafi chose more pro-Western engagement, moved in our direction, and we allowed him to be toppled anyway.
Right, and gave up his nuclear ambitions, and then there was open season.
Yeah.
In relation to Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, firstly, I agree with you. I mean, a president doesn't have to spend 100% of his time on domestic policy, nor is it a forsaking of the importance of domestic policy to meet a foreign leader. I do find Greene's evolution very interesting. Like, she's now this person who talks about affordability quite a lot. Exactly what she wants on healthcare isn't completely clear to me, but she certainly is objecting to the high cost of health insurance, which I think is fine.
She wants what everyone wants, it to be magically fixed and better.
Yes. Well, there we go. Problem solved.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's interesting that she and Trump seem increasingly at odds. I mean, for a while they were sort of keeping it together, and like we read out, she continues to insist that she's still America first and that she's still supportive of him, but he doesn't seem very supportive of her.
Right. So. I mean, there are a number of ways I could critique the Trump administration for not being America first enough in terms of domestic policy, but as I've said a couple of times, I'm relatively satisfied with the foreign policy. Certainly, I question the Iran strikes at the time, although no greater escalation with Iran has come of it. So maybe you can say it was a success. We've done our best in Israel, Gaza. It's still not at all as good as we want it to be. And he's doing his best. He's engaging with Europe to try to confront the very difficult Russia problem. So I'm not, if I'm critiquing the America first stuff, it's not really foreign policy where I'm saying him meeting with a formerly hostile type ideological regime and working toward peace is exactly what I want of this president and what he is. Shown he is different about him compared to past Republican and even Democratic leadership.
Much I could say about the Gaza question, but we'll leave that to another time.
That does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more YouTube exclusive content coming your way later today, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so that you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we'll be back here tomorrow. See you then.